What can a single photograph truly reveal? On a June morning in 1920, outside the grand stone doors of St. James Cathedral in Chicago, a young bride stood frozen beneath her lace veil. Her smile was delicate, her posture perfect, yet something in her eyes betrays a fear that no wedding day should hold. To most, the image appears to capture nothing more than a moment of celebration. But hidden within the soft grain of that black and white print lies the shadow of a man whose obsession had already crossed state lines, whose presence that morning changed the course of one family's life. Tonight we'll travel back to a time when the law barely recognized stalking as a crime, when a woman's silent terror could be dismissed as nerves, and when a single threatening gesture could shatter the safety of wealth and privilege. As you listen, consider what Katherine Harrison endured and what the camera accidentally preserved forever. Settle in, take a slow breath, and let us unfold the story behind a wedding photograph that was never as innocent as it seemed. The night in Chicago was hushed and heavy, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Inside the quiet archives of the Chicago Historical Society, Dr. Helen Morrison gently opened the wooden crate that had arrived earlier that morning. Inside rested a treasure of memory. Thousands of wedding photographs carefully preserved across half a century of joy ritual and hidden stories. The collection came from the estate of Vincent Castellano, a retired photographer whose family had once run one of the city's most prestigious wedding studios, serving Chicago society from 1915 to 1968. Even before she touched the first folder, Morrison felt the faint pulse of another era rising through the paper. Among the countless portraits of smiling couples and satin gowns, one photograph stopped her hand. It was a formal wedding portrait dated June 12, 1920, captured in the first bright summer after the Great War, when America was leaning eagerly into the roaring 20s. The image seemed to glow with the optimism of a city ready to forget the darkness of the past. On the stone steps of St. James Cathedral, Chicago's fashionable elite had gathered to celebrate a union of wealth and influence. The groom, a striking man in his late 20s, wore a perfectly tailored morning coat, striped trousers, and crisp white gloves. Beside him stood his bride, a young woman in an elaborate silk gown, draped with intricate beadwork and a train as long as a whispered prayer. 6 bridesmaids in pale lavender flanked the couple, their faces bright with the uncomplicated happiness of youth. Opposite them, 6 groomsmen smiled with the easy confidence of young men celebrating their friends' good fortune. The photograph seemed to capture everything the decade promised: prosperity, love, and the sweet certainty of a future that could only rise. But as Morrison angled the print beneath her desk lamp and lifted her magnifying glass, that pleasant scene began to fracture. Her trained eye moved to the bride's face. From a distance, the young woman appeared to be smiling, her lips arranged in the socially perfect curve of joy. Yet up close, the smile betrayed itself. The mouth lifted, yes, but the eyes refused to follow. They were wide. Too wide. The whites circled the dark irises in a way no wedding portrait should reveal. Her pupils were dilated as though some invisible terror stood just beyond the photographer's lens. There was a haunted stillness in her gaze, a silent plea for help. And most unsettling of all, she wasn't looking at the camera, nor at her new husband. Her terrified eyes were fixed on something or someone just beyond the edge of the frame, as though a shadow was approaching. The contradiction chilled Morrison. The delicate makeup could not hide the tautness in the bride's skin, the faint tremor along her jaw. It was the face of a woman trapped inside a celebration, forced to mimic happiness while staring into a private nightmare. Morrison had examined thousands of wedding photographs in her career, but never had she encountered a smile so false, a fear so naked. What could have frightened a bride on the very day society told her she should be happiest? The question clung to her as she began to search the studio records of the Castellano family. Slowly, a name emerged from the past. This was the Harrison-Peyton wedding, a union of two of Chicago's most powerful families at the height of the post-war boom. The groom, James Harrison, was heir to Harrison, manufacturing a company made rich by producing military supplies during World War I. The bride, Catherine Peyton, was the daughter of federal judge William Peyton, a man whose influence stretched through the city's legal and political circles. Newspaper clippings of the time described their marriage as the social event of the season. Yet, as Morrison dug deeper into those carefully bound society pages, she began to find details that were anything but celebratory. The deeper Dr. Helen Morrison dug, the more the polished surface of the Harrison-Peyton wedding began to crack. The engagement itself raised the first quiet alarm. Society columns reported that it had been announced only 3 months before the ceremony, an unusually brief courtship for families of such wealth and stature. In 1920, engagements of a year or more were considered the norm, a proper span of time for planning display, and the careful weaving together of two powerful households. Why the rush? The newspapers of the day, while overflowing with praise for the wedding's grandeur, contained subtle hints that something was amiss. One columnist described Miss Peyton as overwhelmed by the magnitude of the occasion, a polite way of saying that her nerves were impossible to ignore. Another remarked that she seemed understandably anxious about her new responsibilities. These were the kinds of carefully chosen words society writers used when the truth was too unsettling to print. Most telling of all was a small, easily overlooked note in the Chicago Tribune the morning after the wedding. It mentioned that the bride had appeared pale during the ceremony and had required assistance from her attendants during the photography session. The phrasing was restrained, but Morrison understood what it implied. Catherine's distress had not only been real, it had been visible to everyone present. As Morrison followed the paper trail further, more questions surfaced. Catherine, known to friends as Catherine in some records, had returned home from Vassar College in late 1919, just 7 months before the wedding, abruptly withdrawing from her studies for personal reasons. A rushed engagement, an incomplete education, a bride who trembled in public. Each fact might have been harmless on its own, but together they formed a pattern that whispered of hidden urgency. Curiosity turned into unease as Morrison consulted the Chicago Municipal Archives. There, in the Peyton family papers donated to the Chicago Bar Association, she found letters that seemed to speak from the shadows. In a March 1920 letter to his brother, Judge William Peyton wrote, "Catherine's circumstances have become untenable. The Harrison family has shown remarkable understanding of her predicament, and James appears genuinely committed to providing her with the protection she desperately needs. Protection. Predicament. Untenable circumstances." These were not the words of a proud father arranging a glittering society marriage. They were the coded language of fear. More letters followed. Catherine's mother wrote to her own sister in April of that year, "We pray daily that marriage will provide Catherine with the sanctuary she requires to escape her current torment. James Harrison is an honorable man who comprehends the gravity of her situation and has pledged to shield her from further harm." Sanctuary, escape, shielding. Each phrase carried the weight of something unspoken, as though the family was carefully circling a danger they dared not name. The picture grew darker still. Records showed that after Catherine's sudden return from college, the Peaton family had hired private security for their Lake Forest estate, an extraordinary measure for a respected judge's household. Guards patrolled the property through the long Illinois nights beginning in late 1919, precisely when Catherine came home and retreated from public view. She appeared at no parties, attended no teas, and moved only between the grand house and its heavily watched gardens. What kind of threat required a young woman of privilege to live in seclusion surrounded by guards? Her marriage arranged in desperate haste. And whatever it was, had it followed her to the steps of St. James Cathedral that June morning, where a single photograph still carried the echo of her silent terror. The final pieces of the mystery came together, like a door unlocking in the dark. Dr. Helen Morrison's breakthrough arrived deep in the Chicago Police Department's historical archives, where the smell of old paper still clung to the air. There, buried among brittle reports and fading ink, she found the name that explained everything: Vincent Torino. The records told a story far more chilling than any society gossip. During Catherine Peaton's years at Vassar College, Torino had worked quietly as a groundskeeper until a chance encounter on one of Catherine's morning walks ignited an obsession that would not burn out. At first, it was only awkward compliments, strange gifts left on benches, and shadowy appearances along the campus paths. But the attention soon turned darker. His notes became threats. His presence became pursuit. Late in 1919, when Catherine reported his behavior to college authorities, Torino was dismissed from his position and ordered to stay away. Instead of ending the nightmare, the dismissal sharpened it. He followed her. From the quiet lawns of Connecticut to the busy streets of Chicago, his fixation grew bolder and more violent. Police reports from early 1920 read like a slow tightening of a noose. Torino was seen lurking near the Peaton family's Lake Forest estate. He attempted to approach Catherine during her rare public outings. He left messages carefully worded, unmistakably menacing, promising that she would never belong to another man. The threats escalated until they described in chilling detail the harm he would bring to anyone who tried to protect her. Judge Peaton used every legal tool at his disposal: restraining orders, private guards, increased police patrols. Yet, Torino slipped past every barrier, a phantom who always seemed to know where to stand and when to disappear. Then came the wedding. In the weeks before June 12th, police received intelligence that Torino had vowed to disrupt the ceremony itself. That morning, he kept his promise. Witnesses recorded his presence across the street from St. James Cathedral as the wedding party emerged for formal photographs. And Catherine saw him. The report from Detective Michael O'Brien captures the moment in sparse clinical language. Suspect Vincent Torino observed making threatening gestures toward the bride during the wedding photography. suspect drew finger across throat in a slashing motion. Bride appeared to be in extreme distress. When approached by officers, suspect fled on foot through nearby alleyways. Imagine it. The cathedral steps alive with music and laughter, the air scented with lilies and warm June sunlight. And beyond the photographer's lens, a man standing motionless in the crowd, staring at the bride and silently dragging his finger across his throat. Now the photograph made perfect sense. Catherine's wide eyes were not the vague anxiety of a nervous bride. They were the eyes of a young woman staring at the very danger her family had feared for months. Her pale face, her trembling posture, the way attendants had to steady her, it was all recorded in those society columns as polite euphemism. But the truth was far more harrowing. She was standing inches from the man who had promised to kill her. The wedding reception at the Palmer House Hotel unfolded under extraordinary security. Chicago police quietly stationed throughout the grand ballroom, while private guards shadowed the guests. James Harrison had been fully briefed, arranging every precaution to keep his new wife alive. And still, Catherine stood before the camera and forced her lips into a practiced smile. That single photograph, once mistaken for a symbol of joy, was in fact a portrait of desperate courage. A young bride holding herself upright while terror stared back at her from the crowd. A frozen moment when love and danger existed side by side, forever captured in silver and shadow. The wedding photograph froze a single heartbeat in time. The instant Catherine's eyes locked across the street and found Vincent Torino waiting in the shadows. What should have been a simple keepsake of joy instead captured the exact moment safety shattered a permanent record of the instant her tormentor returned. Historian Edward Morrison's patient research into Chicago police files revealed that Torino's obsession did not fade with Catherine's vows. Through the summer and fall of 1920, his campaign of stalking and intimidation only grew more dangerous, expanding now to include her new husband, James Harrison. Detective O'Brien's reports trace a chilling escalation. Torino loitering outside the Harrison family mansion, following Catherine during her carefully supervised shopping trips, sending letters that promised her marriage would not shield her from his plans. Then came the vandalism. Windows smashed in the night. The family automobile left, slashed and ruined. Dead animals placed on the doorstep like grotesque calling cards, each accompanied by notes demanding a private meeting and warning of violence if Catherine continued to refuse him. Most disturbing of all were the letters describing in unnervingly precise language what Torino intended to do to James Harrison. He detailed elaborate kidnappings and acts of torture as though Catherine were a prize to be reclaimed, and James merely an obstacle to be destroyed. James responded by hiring private investigators and round-the-clock security. Yet Torino remained one step ahead, slipping past every watchful eye and tightening the psychological trap. Catherine grew nearly housebound, paralyzed by the knowledge that the man who claimed to love her was planning her destruction. By late 1920, federal agents had joined the search, but Torino moved like smoke. Then, in December, the obsession reached its terrible peak. According to police records on the night of December 15th, Vincent Torino made his final desperate attempt to seize the woman he believed was his. He cut the exterior lights of the Harrison mansion, bypassed the new security measures, and climbed through a second-floor window while the family dined below. James Harrison, hearing an unfamiliar sound upstairs, went to investigate. In the hallway outside Catherine's bedroom, he confronted Torino, knife in hand and eyes blazing. The struggle was brutal. Torino slashing James, fighting to keep him from the door until Catherine herself appeared. Her later testimony described the sight of both men bleeding. Torino turning toward her and shouting that if he could not have her, no one would. Despite his wounds, James lunged again, dragging Torino away from the woman he swore to protect. Neighbors, alarmed by the commotion, had already summoned police. Officers burst through the doors just as Torino raised the knife for a final strike. The nightmare ended there. Vincent Torino was arrested and charged with attempted murder burglary and years of relentless stalking. The court sentenced him to 20 years in prison, but the scars he left on Catherine Harrison would last far longer than his confinement. The wedding photograph remains a deceptively beautiful image of lace and flowers, and hidden within it, the frozen instant when obsession revealed itself and the fight for